What's up guys, this is SkyTech Freak and today I have a very simple video for you guys. It's not going to be an over-the-top gaming PC build, although those are coming. There's one I just built recently which I'm editing the video for, and I have another one coming which is going to be about repopulating a Zotac Magnus 1 and modding it with a 3060 Ti and a 10500 processor. But that's not what today's video is about at all. It's not about gaming CPs or even high performance desktops at all. It's going to be about how you can take a desktop PC that you might have from 3 to 5 to 6 years ago, and how you can upgrade that without really changing too much inside it. How you can upgrade that to make your basic everyday tasks anything from 10 to 20 times faster, and I'm not exaggerating. This is going to be how to breathe new life into an old desktop CPU. And the way that I came about this video is because I actually did this for someone. And you know how these things go, right? I have some excuse of a tech YouTube channel going. My Instagram's popping off recently because of that build that I just did. You guys should follow me there. I'll keep a link in the description. But the point is the word gets around, right? So now all these adults are coming up to me like, oh, Akash knows his technology. And they're coming up to me like, oh, I think there's a virus in my phone. Our desktop CPU is too slow. We want to sell it. We want to get a new one. Which ones do you recommend? Or, like my wife is keeping too many icons on the desktop. Do you think that's what's slowing down the computer? And, questions like this. And the reason I say adults ask these questions is not because, like, young people don't run into tech issues, but either you're someone that works intimately with these devices, so someone that games or does video editing and stuff like that, and so then you know that these aren't the reasons why PCs slow down, or then you're someone that's just pushing like data through spreadsheets all day long, and then you don't need to have an internet connection with your device, or you just use Mac, which screw that. So, but yeah, these adults are from a different generation, right, where they used to go to office with that desktop CPU and they're very used to working on it. And even after they retire, they'll either bring that desktop CPU from their office home and still continue to work on that, and will just not switch to laptops. So I have a lot of people like this that are always asking me about, my desktop's really slow. What's wrong? Is there a virus? Do I need to get another CPU upgrade? Or what needs to happen, right? And the person I did this for is actually my aunt, because I was sitting with her one day, and she's a professional artist, so she does like image editing professionally. And I was sitting with her and she was using, another one of these like 3-4 year old desktop PCs, and she was on Photoshop, and she sort of had to just guess because her computer wasn't able to show her real-time renders. She would just like do some modifications, guess, then apply, then wait for the render to complete to see that is this what she wanted the final effect to be. If not, she'd have to like undo it. It's another really long process. So I was sitting with her and watching her do this, and this is the way she makes money, right? So there was a lot of time being spent in just rendering and waiting, that same time which could have been used instead in like more productive work and actually applying different effects and filters onto the images that she was working on, and being able to get more of them done in shorter time, because it's not like she is actively getting tired, right? The only thing she was tired of doing was waiting. So I was like, yeah, this is tough to watch. And she was like, yeah, I know, I bought this PC not that long ago, but it's really slowed down now, and I don't know what to do. Maybe I need to buy another PC. And I was like, hold on, let me take a look at it. And I downloaded an application called CPU-Z, and I'll show you guys all the stuff to do, the steps before that. If you want to just skip the story, I'll make sure that there's a timestamp that you guys can just skip to. But basically, I opened her CPU-Z, and I found that there was a pretty good processor. So it was an 8th gen i3 processor. So now, of course, 8th gen, given that we're currently in 12th gen Intel, seems 4 generations old, and it's not like every year there's a new generation. So it's definitely over 5 years old since the launch of that CPU. And even at new, that CPU is from the lowest SKU of the i series, so it was an i3 processor. So it's not only that 4 generations old, more than 5 years old, but also the lowest SKU of something that's 4 generations old. So, immediately when people see that, and people tend to know what an i7, i5, i3 is, right? So immediately when someone sees i3, they're like, okay, this is why my PC is slow. This is the reason. I obviously just need to get like an i5 or i7 processor, because an i3 is just the lowest and the worst thing there is. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the i3 is a perfectly capable processor for things like web browsing, photo editing, and things like that. It's actually other parts of the computer that people cheap out on when they buy pre-builds, or that pre-build manufacturers cheap out on when they're selling you a pre-build, things like RAM and storage, right? So these things bottleneck the CPU. A bottleneck is when a certain computer component is slowing down or not allowing other components in the PC to reach their maximum. So a lot of people tend to think that it's the CPU, the i3 CPU, that's bottlenecking other parts of their computer, when it's actually the other way around. So I looked at her computer and I see that there's just one single stick of 4 GB RAM, and I look at a boot drive and it's a 500 GB like WD hard disk drive, right, which is, we know, hundreds of times slower than an SSD. So I'm like, hold on, there's a very easy way to go ahead and fix this. We can just get you more RAM and we can just upgrade your storage to an SSD. And so that's what I went ahead and did. I just went ahead and bought a 500 GB 2.5 inch SATA SSD from Crucial, and 2 sticks of Crucial 8 GB RAM, which got her RAM from 4 GB straight up to 16 GB, and it changed her boot drive to an SSD, which is, like I said, 100-200 times faster than an HDD, and it made a world of difference. So now she's able to edit her photos, she's able to see them in real time with renders. I also upgraded a little bit of the CPU cooling system and stuff like that, and that's not stuff that's necessary. Anyway, so yeah, once I made these upgrades, so once I switched out her 4 GB RAM for 2 sticks of 8 GB RAM, giving her 16 GB of RAM, and switched out, well, I didn't even have to switch out her hard disk, right? So I kept a hard disk as a second disk for storage, because given that she is a photo editor, she's got a lot of these files and raw files, and if you're not using them constantly, and if you're not using that drive to boot applications, a hard disk is perfectly good use of space to just store files, and then when you need to work on them constantly, or you need to keep pulling things from them, you can move them to the SSD. So I kept her 500 GB hard disk. I just added a 500 GB SSD, which I transferred the Windows over to, and I'll show you how to transfer Windows over very easily. It's not a tough process at all. And so as soon as I did that to her system, it is so fast. It was speeding up. It booted in like 1/10 of the amount of time that it used to boot up, even though the CPU is the same. It's just because the SSD is so much faster. The IC was able to make use of that much faster SSD. And of course, while she was doing her editing and rendering, she was able to actually see these effects in real time. The render times became much smaller, and I think it was just overall a very beneficial exercise. So I thought that I'd share that with you guys. And altogether, this cost me about 10,000 rupees to buy 2 sticks of 8 GB RAM and a 500 GB SSD, but this upgrade can be like half the price of that if you decide, instead of a 500 GB SSD, to go for a 250 GB SSD, which is perfectly fine if you're just doing web browsing, and a 250 GB SSD is actually what's suggested for a Windows boot drive. So if you're just using it to boot Windows and save some images and browse the internet and stuff like that, have some programs on it, you can even not go with a 500 GB SSD and actually choose a 250 GB SSD from it. And instead of getting 2 sticks of 8 GB RAM, you can see that if one of your slots is populated by a 4 GB stick, instead of taking that out and adding 2 sticks, you can just add a second 4 GB stick, which will just double your RAM. And 8 GB is also very adequate for stuff like simply web browsing and things like that. Given that my aunt was an artist, I wanted to make sure that she had enough storage on her SSD for the file she's working on. And Photoshop itself is a big program. It's got a lot of these temporary files it wants to save, so I wanted to give her some space on the SSD for big programs like that. And then of course, given that she's going to be editing and having a bunch of tabs and Google Chrome tabs and stuff open, I wanted to give her enough headroom on RAM. But instead of going for a 16 GB RAM and 500 GB SSD upgrade, you can very easily just get a second stick of 4 GB RAM, making your system 8 GB RAM, and then get a 250 GB SSD, and that's perfectly adequate. And let's take a look at how I did these upgrades now. So the issue is that I had to do this at their place, so I didn't have my recording equipment, and I was also not well, so like my voice and all was gone. So I wasn't able to like capture the process while it was happening, but I did take like plenty of photos that I'll quickly share with you guys right now. So if you guys have skipped my whole story and just jumped directly to this point in the video, which trust me, I don't blame you, the TLDR is basically, if you feel like your PC or your desktop PC is slowing down, don't blame the processor, don't blame the motherboard. Instead, take a look at your RAM situation, see how much RAM is there, and see if both your slots are populated or if it's just a single channel, single stick of RAM that's in your desktop CPU. And I'll tell you how to do that using a software. And the second thing you want to look at is your boot drive. So you want to see if you're booting Windows or running Windows OS from a hard disk drive, or if you actually have an SSD installed. And if you're booting from a hard disk drive, it's time to upgrade that to an SSD, which is hundreds of times faster than that hard disk. So I'm going to show you how to check both these things in your computer, and then I'm going to talk about how to upgrade them physically in the system itself. Okay, so the first thing we should check is our RAM situation, and to do that, what you want to do is download an application called CPU-Z. And so once you've installed CPU-Z, an application like this should show up, and there'll be a bunch of tabs over here. So you'll be able to check your CPU and what generation, etc. it is, and it should be a pretty good CPU from what I'm expecting. If it's a pre-build from the last 3 to 5 years, again, I'm usually pretty certain that it's not the CPU that bottlenecks the system. So you want to skip the CPU in the main board, which is the motherboard tab, and come straight to memory. And here it'll tell you if you're running a single or dual type memory channel. Single means there's only one stick installed, and dual would mean that you're using both sticks in the system. And it'll also tell you that overall your RAM is only 4 gigabytes. So it'll tell you what the RAM situation is. You go to the next tab, which is SPD. This is still relevant to the RAM, and then you can see in what slot what kind of RAM is installed. Now, since this CPU, which is the one that my aunt had only one slot populated, I could only check the slot 1. This is the important information that you want to note down. So this is now the DDR speed. So this will tell you the DDR generation. So that means the generation of RAM that it is. This is DDR4. We now have DDR5, but most systems, including gaming systems and production systems right now, still use DDR4 RAM. So DDR4 is the most relevant generation right now. So as you can see, this uses DDR4 technology, and it uses 2666 megahertz. So this is the speed that the RAM runs at, or the speed that it refreshes at. And it's a module made by RAMXL technology. Now, RAMXL technology isn't really like an over-the-counter seller of RAM, but a lot of OEMs and pre-builds use RAMXL RAMs for all their builds. So as you can see, it's a 4 GB 2666 megahertz DDR4 RAM. So these are the three things that are important, right? The size, the generation, and the speed. So now if you're going to be looking for RAM for this system, and one slot is populated and you want to populate the other slot, what you want to look for is DDR4 2666 megahertz 4 GB RAM stick. Now, as for checking if your system has a hard disk or an SSD installed, what you want to do is go to start and then go to create and format hard disk partitions. You can just search that in your start menu, and then you'll get the disk management service. You can also just straight away type in disk management. And basically I have all SSDs in the system except for disk 0. So it'll also tell you how many actual physical disks are in the drive, because sometimes what happens is there's only one disk in the system. So let's say there's just one hard disk of 500 GB, but when you go to Windows Explorer or you go to this PC or my PC, it shows you there's a C drive and a D drive, which makes it look like maybe there are two disks installed in your system, but actually what's happened is they've just partitioned the same single hard disk into a C drive and a D drive. So what you want to do is just go down to disk management by searching create and partition disk drives in the start menu, and then you'll be able to see how many disks are installed in your computer. Now, this is my gaming computer. I have a disk for Windows, I have a disk for games, I have a disk for video editing, which this is being saved on right now, and I also have a disk for downloads. Now, the only one of my disk that's in a hard drive is disk 0, which is my downloads disk. So you go to properties, and basically you just want to search this up. Just Google this and it'll tell you whether or not your disk is a hard disk or an SSD. So if you Google this, you'll find that, okay, this is a Seagate 2000 GB or 2 TB hard disk drive. And similarly, if it's an SSD, like let's say I look at this, it says Western Digital SN550E, which is an NVMe SSD. So basically all you want to do is go to the disk, and if you only have one drive in the system, which I suspect most pre-builds have, just one hard disk which is partitioned into a C and D drive. Basically, when you go to disk management, you'll only see one disk, so it'll be named like disk 0 or disk 1. You'll go to properties, and then you'll be able to search that serial number, and most likely you'll find that it is indeed a hard disk. So once you've identified that it's a hard disk and that you do want to upgrade to an SSD, a SATA SSD, we'll go to the next step. Now, you can buy these online. Make sure that you don't pick up a memory module for laptops, because the size of a laptop, even DDR4, so DDR4 for laptops is different than DDR4 for desktops. So you just want to make sure that you don't pick up a laptop DDR4 and actually go down to a 4 GB 2666 megahertz module for desktops. Now, Crucial makes these Crucial basic model of RAM. You should usually just pick these up. In fact, when I upgraded my own system also, I used 2 of these 8 GB Crucial Basics RAMs. So basically, if you've got one stick of 4 GB, even if it's RAMXL, if the brand is different, it's not a big deal. As long as the speed the generation and the amount of RAM that there is the same as the first stick, you can add the second stick and be rest assured. Don't add an 8 GB if the first stick is 4 GB, because while that'll add you more RAM, it can cause a lot of complications in your system. So let's say you feel that 2 sticks of 4 GB would still not be enough, then I suggest that you take out the first stick of 4 GB as well and buy 2 sticks of 8 GB RAM and add those to your system instead of adding one 8 GB stick to the existing 4 GB stick. So let's say you want 8 GB of RAM, you just need to buy another one of these, given that your system does have 4 GB of RAM already in a single stick. Now, if your system has one stick of 2 GB RAM only, or 2 sticks of 2 GB RAM leading up to 4 GB RAM, I do think that you should get rid of both those sticks and instead upgrade to either 2 sticks of 4 GB or 2 sticks of 8 GB, because 4 GB RAM in 2022 is really not adequate for any amount of computing in today's day and age. So I would suggest the minimum is 8 GB. If you have the headroom to double that, then you should get 2 sticks of 8 GB RAM. But let's say you already have 1 stick of 4 GB RAM and you don't want to spend too much, then just getting a second stick of 4 GB RAM is plenty adequate. Now, a lot of times what you can do is during checkout, there'll be an option to get it installed professionally. And if you're not someone that's comfortable opening up computers and stuff like that, although a RAM installation is really very easy, you just pull 2 tabs on the side and I'll show you on the system where those tabs are. But all you have to do is pull those 2 tabs, pull out the stick and install a new stick. And in your case, if the second slot doesn't even have a stick already, all you have to do is just add a stick, line up these pins and line up this one sort of divot that's there to the divot on the RAM slot in your motherboard, and all you have to do is click it in. It's not a very complicated process. All you have to do is make sure that it's firmly in there. But again, if you're not someone that opens up computers, if you're not someone that's comfortable doing this, often when you buy or add to cart, it gives you an option to get it installed professionally, and you can go ahead and take that option as well, especially on Amazon. So now that we have the RAM purchased and we know what RAM we're going to use, the next purchase you want to do is an SSD. So make sure you type in 2.5-inch SSD, because there is another type of SSD which is known as an NVMe SSD. But these sort of SSDs aren't actually supported by all systems, and if you have an older system, it's likely that you don't have a slot for this, and the installation for this is also a little more complicated. So we just want to ignore NVMe SSDs, because 2.5-inch SSDs are fast enough, and your power supply and your CPU should have enough of the headers and compatibility for things like this. So as you can see, what I did was I bought this exact SSD. So as you can see, I have the box for that here. It's a BX500 480 GB SSD. The BX model is a little cheaper, or the BX model is the cheaper version of the MX model from Crucial. They're both Crucial models of SSD. As you can see, all the products I bought for this system were Crucial, and I highly suggest, or I highly recommend Crucial as a brand to make these upgrades. So if you want to go ahead and get a 500 GB SSD for a low cost, you can pick up the BX500, or you can pick up the BX500 in 240 GB or the MX500 in 250 GB. Like I said, a 240 GB SSD is more than enough if all you're doing is just booting into Windows. I would not suggest a WD green. I would suggest a WD blue if you had to go WD with these SATA SSDs. But yeah, basically the prices of a 250 GB SSD can range from around 2000 to 2500, and you can start getting 500 GB SSDs at the 3000 sort of price range. This might also be lower than usual just based on Prime Day. As you can see, the WD green that I don't suggest is more expensive than the BX480. So if you had to get one of the two, I would say get the BX500 480 GB, which is a very good SSD. I've used it in my PlayStation, I've used it in computers before. And if you are on a really tight budget, go ahead and get the 240 GB or a 250 GB SSD from another manufacturer. Just make sure it's a SATA 2.5-inch SSD and not an NVMe SSD. So once you've bought both these things, it's now time to talk about how you would move your Windows installation from the HDD that's extremely slow and move it to the SSD, right? And I'm going to show you how to do that. So this was the system, and the first time I booted it without any of the upgrades, it was like incredibly, unbelievably slow. It's a Lenovo pre-built Idea Center, like I said, i3 8th generation. And so, you know what I did? I opened it up once I had all the parts in, and here you can see this is where I upgraded the RAM. So this is actually, I'm just gonna show you this. If you can see here, that's the RAM itself, 4 GB RAM module that I took out, and here are the two 8 GB crucial RAM slots that I have populated with 2 of the RAM sticks that I bought. So each of these is 8 GB each, and I removed the 4 GB RAM XL and added 2 of the 8 GB RAM sticks. And again, even if you're increasing the amount of RAM, so let's say you want to take out the single stick or the double stick of RAM that you already have in your system, make sure the generation, so that's DDR4, and the speed is still the same. So don't go from 2666 megahertz like a 3200 megahertz RAM stick, because it's possible that's not compatible or it'll just underclock it. It's best to just go with Crucial Basics 2666 megahertz RAM, or whatever the RAM speed of the module that's already in your system is. It's better to get 2 modules of the same speed and the same generation, even if you are upgrading both the sticks instead of just adding another single stick. So because this RAM module was 4 GB 2666 megahertz of DDR4, I got 2 sticks of 8 GB 2666 megahertz of DDR4, but I made sure the speed was still the same, which, and I've said this too many times, is 2666 megahertz. So here I've upgraded both the RAM sticks. I've added RAMs in each of the slots, and as you can see, the SSD here is actually like Velcro strapped, because what a lot of these pre-builds will do is make enough space for hard disk drives, which are 3.5 inch drives, but not have enough like mounting holes and stuff for 2.5 inch drives, because they just aren't used to putting them in your system. So like I said, if you, during checkout of these parts, if you decide to go ahead and get a professional to install them, I'm sure they'll figure it out somehow. But if you have to do this yourself, just be prepared to like have a few zip ties, etc., which will help you like stick this on to some of the grooves in your hard disk. Now the reason again I mentioned not getting an NVMe is because, as you can see here, or if you don't know how to recognize it, there isn't an NVMe slot, but the 2.5 inch SSDs actually use the exact same 2 wires to connect to a PC that 3.5 inch hard disks use. So here I'll show you what those 2 cables are. This is a SATA cable which goes into the motherboard here, and this is a SATA power cable which goes into the power supply. So this is the power supply. As you can see, there's a bunch of wires coming out of the power supply, and this is a SATA power cable. Similarly, because this is an angle, I'm not able to show you that so well, but both these cables are also installed here. So there's a SATA cable here and a SATA power cable here, one installed with the motherboard and the other one attached to the power supply. Now, when you buy the 2.5 inch SSD, you may not get a SATA cable to connect to the motherboard, and usually if you buy a motherboard you get a lot of SATA cables, but with the pre-build obviously they didn't give you those extra cables. So you might also want to go ahead and buy another SATA cable, which I believe can be quite cheap. Let me just quickly tell you what the cost of one of these is. So as you can see, it's like 200 rupees. You can get them as low as 90 rupees. So I would suggest buying, like, you won't need a pack of 5 and stuff like that. You just need to pick up a single SATA cable. If you already have a hard disk, then that's already using one SATA cable as it is. So you just want to pick up a single SATA cable. This is a pack of 2 for 90. So I mean, just look at whatever cheapest one you can get. You don't need a very high quality SATA cable as it is, but that's what that is. If you get it professionally installed, like I said, during checkout, you have the option of getting both the RAM sticks and the SSD professionally installed. In that case, I'm sure the technician will have a SATA cable, and if you have to pay him the charge for that, whatever. But if you're doing this yourself, or if you just want to be on the safe side, if you're ordering this 2.5 inch SSD and you don't have extra SATA cables lying around, just go ahead and pick one up. So as you can see, like I said, I have fastened this SSD over here with zip ties, and I know it doesn't look pretty, but again, the system is just going to shut down. And a lot of people will say that, don't you have to really fasten drives so that when they spin they don't move around a lot, because that can damage the drive? And that is true for 3.5 inch hard disks, because they literally spin when they try to read data. So this one is fastened on there quite well, and this is the one that came by default. But SSDs don't work like that. But of course, still you do want your components fastened as tightly as possible, which is why I've also done a lot of this cabling up with zip ties and tidied it up. You do want your components fastened so that they can only do minimal, so that they don't damage the internal components of your PC by hitting something else or shaking around too much by itself. Now, one of the other upgrades that I did, which is not really necessary, but this heatsink actually had this fan on it, and I noticed that the CPU was getting hot. Now, the CPU could have been getting hot because it was trying so hard to push data through a slow drive faster, but I decided that there can't just be one exhaust fan for the CPU, so I added the fan that was actually on the heatsink here, I added that as an intake, and I actually zip tied another fan. As you can see, this Be Quiet fan, I actually zip tied that to this heatsink. Now, these two fans were both 80 millimeters, and I was thinking that I'll just add another 80 millimeter fan to this heatsink, but I also noticed that the 80 millimeter fan was actually not being able to cover the entire area of the heatsink. So I had one of these Be Quiet 90 millimeter fans lying around with me, and when I put it at this angle, I realized that this fan is actually able to completely cover the heatsink, and there's no part of the fan that's overshooting the heatsink. So I thought that it's a very good idea to sort of just go ahead and, instead of that, zip tie this to the heatsink, and that's exactly what I did. As you can see, I've been using zip ties a lot. So there's the first, second, third, and fourth zip tie that I used to mount the fan to this heatsink, because obviously there weren't going to be like pre-installed holes for a fan that was bigger than the one that came installed with it. So I just sort of zip tied it together, and of course thermal performance went up a lot. Be Quiet is also like an expensive fan. I just had it lying around, so I was okay to sort of use it. But this is not something you need to do. I just figured that the PC could use with another intake fan over here, and since I had a third fan lying around, I did stick it on the CPU heatsink. Never remove a fan from the CPU heatsink if you don't have one to replace it, because the CPU is the hottest component of your PC, and if there isn't an active fan or active cooling on it, you're going to be in deep trouble. The computer's just going to start shutting down and stuff like that. But basically, again, for the last time, I added 2 sticks of 8GB RAM. I have added this SSD over here. It uses a SATA cable and a SATA power cable, same as any hard disk. So any computer that is compatible with hard disks is going to be compatible with 2.5-inch SSDs, which is why I recommend them over NVMEs for upgrades like this. Obviously, NVMEs are much faster, but you won't run into that issue of compatibility. And then what I did was, apart from adding that one exhaust fan, from removing the heatsink, I added a Be Quiet fan to the heatsink, which has of course cooled the system, but again, not a necessary step. All you guys really have to do is add those 2 sticks of RAM, or just add a second stick of RAM and add this SSD. And now I'll tell you that once you have these components installed in your computer, how do you shift your Windows installation from the hard disk to the SSD so that it now boots faster and opens up programs faster and doesn't lag anymore. The RAM will immediately start working on its own. There's nothing else you have to do to it. As soon as you plug it in and you turn it on, the BIOS will retrain itself. So it's called retraining. It'll retrain itself. It'll identify the extra RAM and it'll be like, okay, cool, I have this much more headroom now to work with in RAM, and the computer will just automatically understand that it has that much more RAM. But for the SSD, you do want to move your Windows installation from the hard disk to the SSD, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. So once you've installed both your new sticks of RAM or your single stick of RAM along with the earlier one, and you've plugged in your new SATA SSD and made sure everything's working and turned on your system and booted into Windows, you now want to migrate that boot operating system from your HDD to your SSD so that the system boots faster, because even though you've put in that new SSD, it's still going to be running really slow because your Windows installation is still on your HDD. So I'm going to show you how to move that Windows installation from your HDD to your SSD, and to do that you want to download a program called Disk Genius. I'll make sure all the links are in the description. Basically, there's 2 software you're going to need for this. One is CPU-Z to identify your RAM, and then the second one is Disk Genius to transfer your Windows installation from one disk to another. So once you open Disk Genius, there'll be an option for OS migration. There'll only be one disk on which your operating system is anyway installed, so it's going to ask you to pick a target disk. I have these 3 target disks, but I'm not planning on shifting my Windows installation, so I'm going to click cancel. But the sort of window you're going to get is source disk, which is going to be your HDD. So you'll be able to see that same serial number you saw when you were in disk management should be your source disk, and then you can select a target disk, which will be your SSD. Make sure you can double check the serial number or whatever the model number of your SSD. Make sure that becomes the target disk, and you'll select that, and then all you have to do is press start. There'll be an option to prevent the system from sleeping during the execution, and there'll be a system to do a hot migration or reboot to Windows to a Windows environment. You can do a hot migration. I've never run into any issues with those, but you can also do a Windows environment reboot in case you don't want to touch your system while the whole process is happening. And then there'll also be an option to automatically change the BIOS setting to boot from your new drive. One other thing that happens is when you choose a source disk, of course my source disk only has Windows C, but some of them also have a D drive. Like I said, a single disk can sometimes have a C and a D drive. So when you do OS migration, you have the option of only transferring your C drive and the relevant Windows partitions to the target disk. I suggest you do that, and that way when you transfer your C drive to the SSD, you can format your hard disk and rename that as your D drive and copy all your stuff. So you can make a backup of your D drive, and then once your Windows installation has moved from your HDD to your SSD, you can format your hard disk drive and then copy all the files that were on your D drive to your hard disk. So then you'll have two drives again, but instead it'll be two physical different drives. Your storage amount will also increase. And so yeah, you'll basically have a lot more space. And like I said, it's a good idea to keep that hard disk anyway, because hard disk, when you're not using it to boot programs and just to store files, is still a very, very good piece of technology to have as a storage system. So yeah, that's all you guys need to do. Once the Windows transfers over through Disk Genius, nothing else has to happen. It'll reboot, and it should automatically reboot to your new disk drive in case you run into any issues with the Windows migration. And sometimes it happens. I've run into issues only once or twice with Disk Genius. It is a free software. I do really trust it, but in case your Windows isn't being able to transfer properly, what you want to do is unplug the SATA drive. When you unplug the SATA drive, it will once again boot into the hard disk drive, which you shouldn't have formatted until you've made sure that the SSD is a capable boot drive. But in case Disk Genius isn't being able to cut it, there's another software called Macrium Reflect. Now, it is free, but the process for downloading that is a little bit more complicated, where you have to like sign up and then get a serial key and then use that serial key to download. It's not as easy and open source as Disk Genius is, but it is one that fails a lot less. Not that Disk Genius fails often, but I've run into issues once or twice. You won't run into those issues with Macrium Reflect, that you can be rest assured with. But again, I would say that first try with Disk Genius. I do really trust the software. So like I said, get into Disk Genius, OS migration, select your target disk. Make sure you're only transferring your C drive, not the D drive, even if that disk has two partitions. Then once Disk Genius is done migrating your OS, it'll automatically boot. If you so select those options, it'll automatically boot into your SSD. You'll notice a marked difference in the speed and the amount of boot time and stuff like that. So it'll be much faster. And then you can go back into disk management. So you can go back to create and format disk partitions, and then you'll find that your to identify which disk is your HDD and which disk is your SSD, you'll see that the C drive is only in one of them. But of course, you can still go to properties and you can find the property of the one that is your hard disk, and then all you have to do is right click and format, and then you can format it and give it the drive letter D, and then you'll be done, and you should see a marked difference in speed and performance of your system. I hope this really helped. I know this is a very long video and I've explained things repeatedly. I've repeated myself quite often, but I just wanted to make sure no one goes wrong with this, because I feel like the audience for this kind of a video are people that are a little less tech inclined, or it's someone that's doing this for someone else. So you want to make sure that you don't make any mistakes. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys now. So as you can see, this was my system once I booted it, really fast and working like a wonder. So if you are someone that have done this process before, or you're someone that's planning this process, I hope this video has helped. If it has helped, or if you like this sort of content, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and if you've been able to perform such an exercise for anyone else or yourself with an older desktop CPU. That's all for now. Look forward to the coming videos. There's going to be one, like I said, on a super cool white gaming PC build, and another one on the Zotac Magnus 1 that I'm going to put a 10500 and a 3060 Ti in. So yeah, looking forward to those. Again, hope this helped. See you guys in the next one. Thank you.